On the reshuffle announcement last night, and we're joined via Zoom by political analyst Levy Ndou. Thank you so much, as always, for agreeing to speak to us, Mr. Ndou. Always a pleasure to see you.
Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to the viewers at home. Thank you for having me.
I mean, quite a few surprises in terms of the cabinet reshuffle announcement. It seems most are quite shocked by the resignation of the now former finance minister, Thandi Modise. I mean, what stood out for you last night as you were listening to that announcement by the president?
Well, firstly, the reshufflement by the president never came as a surprise. This, for me, is a forced reshufflement based on the fact that former minister in the presidency, Jackson Tembu, had passed on, the health minister had resigned, and the security cluster had to be shaken up. And for me, as expected, I expected Dr. Joe Phaahla to actually come in the Department of Health. Remember, Joe Phaahla has been the Deputy Minister for quite some time, and in the words of former Minister Mkhize, he says he's resigning because he wants stability in the department. And I think when you have got Joe Phaahla, it's actually a continuation, because this is a man who has been in the department for some time. I also see the appointment of the Minister of Defense, for me, as the right choice by the president, because as a disciplinarian and as a person who holds a lot of authority within the ranks of the army, I think this is one person who will still be able to perform and perform much better. Are there surprises with the movements in the security cluster? For me, no surprises at all, because what the security cluster brought us a few weeks ago would actually indeed require a reshufflement.
Yeah, you seem to be quite satisfied with some of those appointments. You highlighted in particular the health ministry. But as a whole, can we at all sort of, start to believe that this cabinet reshuffle will bring about any meaningful change? I mean, essentially, it goes back to the question of, what's the point of it all if it won't impact, the lives of the majority in the country? I mean, do we see that as such? I hear you talking about the health ministry, and that we now have someone who was indeed within the ministry to begin with, and that is a sort of a continuation. But one wonders in terms of the fact that we need improvements rather than a continuation. So maybe you can explain to me what you mean by that.
Well, I think firstly, Flo, there seems to be a trend in South Africa, and this trend talks to certain individuals who are supposed to be appointed ministers. Each time you hear about a cabinet reshufflement, you'd always see same people being moved from one department to the other. And this has been the case with former President Mandela up until now that we have got President Ramaphosa. Certain individuals seem to have been created to become ministers, whether they perform or not perform. There are certain individuals who would constantly be moved from one department to the other, like Minister Sisulu. And that creates a situation where you end up not being able to identify areas that will be able to say, this is one area where this individual has been able to perform very, very well. And for me, this is just also, on the other hand, it's a recyclement of the same people moving from one space to the other. What then we'll expect to see would be whether, based on the new mandate given to them, they'll be able to perform quite differently. In any way, the manifesto of the party, the policies of the party still have to be implemented. But I think for me, cabinet reshufflement this time was informed by the inconsistencies in the security cluster, the passing on of Jackson Mthembu, and also the resignation of the finance minister. And for me, the president, rather than bringing in new people as deputy ministers, it is just the old same people, but given different responsibilities.
Interestingly, though, soon after we got the news, the news of the reshuffle, we also then, on the back of that, got news that the markets had reacted negatively then to that reshuffle. And it was quite interesting to me that many of the media houses used the face of the new finance minister, Godongwana, as the face of this disappointment within the markets. And the first thing I could think about was, could we then have another situation, another Des van Rooyen sort of a situation, given that the market sort of reacted this way? I mean, what are your thoughts? And I think we haven't spoken significantly there around the changes in the finance ministry.
Well, there were mixed feelings on matters relating to the former finance minister. Certain people were actually saying that the finance minister seemed to be more independent, even though the markets are very friendly towards him. But at the same time, there were people who were saying that we need a person of Mboweni's caliber to hold on onto the market, onto the department, so that the markets, as they respond positively towards him, that has got a positive impact on our economy. Obviously, very few people expected Minister Godongwana to be appointed in that position. Yes, of course, he runs the economic cluster at the ruling party, and he has got sufficient experience on matters relating to finance. But he is also having his own background relating to how he actually vacated his previous position. And that, I think, for me, influenced the reaction that we actually got from the markets. In most instances, you would expect that when the president takes this kind of decisions, he will also be cognizant of the fact that this should be an individual who should be friendly to the markets, and unfortunately, that has not been the case. This then puts a lot of pressure on the current finance minister and his department to ensure that they actually bring back the confidence of the markets and they put our economy on track.
Yeah. So the ministers who were not moved, the ones that kept their positions, can we safely say that the president continues then to have faith in them? And in some of those ministries there have been a lot of questions. We look at transport, for example, where people are still complaining about road infrastructure. I mean, can we read this as approval by the president, where certain ministers were not in fact reshuffled or moved or taken out altogether?
Well, there are a number of other ministries that one would have thought that the president would have touched on. And I think for me, the president this time was actually saying, I'm dealing with a partial reshufflement of cabinet. And even though there are other departments that in the public eye, they're actually not performing well. And you could mention many of them. But maybe one of the reasons will be that as they submit their performance contracts to the presidency, most of them would say, maybe we couldn't be able to perform well because of the COVID-19 situation. Yeah. But for me, this was not an overall reshufflement of cabinet. It was a forced reshufflement based on what has actually happened. And maybe if one would just pose a question, my view would be that maybe if we did not have the situation in KwaZulu-Natal and some parts of Gauteng, maybe the president was just going to say, I'm only replacing the late Jackson Mthembu and the Minister of Health. But because of this situation, then the president was actually forced. If we still have to look at the performance of ministers based on the performance contract that they've signed, one would have expected indeed that there should have been a major changes in the cabinet, unlike what has actually happened now.
All right, we always appreciate your analysis here on SABC News. Thank you as always, Mr. Ndou.
You're welcome.
That is political analyst Mr. Levy Ndou talking to us about his reaction, really, to the cabinet reshuffle that, of course, we got news of yesterday. Well.